It's The Executive Edge with Sue Firth. The podcast that gives you an edge in life and business with practical skills that you can apply to achieve and maintain success.
Welcome everyone to this week's episode of The Executive Edge. Now this is the podcast for skills in life and business, and I am Sue Firth. Today I have a really interesting guest. This is Sean Johnson. Sean, it's a real pleasure having you on the show. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Well, that's good of you. Now, I know that your business is in Chicago, if I'm right.
Evanston, just north of Chicago, but yeah.
Right, okay. But your background has certainly been many and varied. So right now, I know you're the CEO of a company called Madison, which is brilliant, and this markets for professional services companies. But your background's also quite interesting. So tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, sure. So previous to Madison, I spent about 12 years building a company called Manifold with two other partners. We called it a venture holding company. So we had an advisory business that did innovation consulting. We had started off doing more product development, strategy work for startups, but we kind of moved upstream to enterprise over the years. And then we had an early stage fund, had about 25 or so investments in that. And then for 9 years, I taught at Northwestern Kellogg digital marketing in the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Initiative. And then, in 2022, COVID comes and, upends the world. And I think like many people, there was kind of a period of reflection, let's say. And I sort of realized I was dealing with like a tremendous amount of kind of stress and anxiety in that business, trying to keep all of those plates spinning. We had about 70 folks on the team. When you invest in early stage startups, 70% of them are on fire at any given time for various reasons. And we
Good point.
Took on a lot of that emotional burden as well. And we were talking about kind of where we wanted to go and where we wanted the next 10 years to look like as a business. And I think I just realized that I wanted different things than my partners did from a life perspective. I didn't have a very strong aspirations to continue to scale the thing dramatically. And I just sort of realized, I didn't necessarily agree. And, I've got 6 years left with my kiddos, and what would that cost me to pursue that? And so, stepped away, took a year and a half off, but got antsy, didn't realize I didn't want to do nothing. And so, started exploring some ideas. Madison was actually the third idea. The first two weren't good enough. And so I killed them pretty quickly, but Madison is doing well. And so, so it's been exciting. Madison launched in January. We got 10 clients so far. And it's a neat opportunity to build something kind of purely in my own image, so to speak, where I'm not having to negotiate, not necessarily always in a bad way, but negotiate with other people. It's an opportunity to kind of, I don't know. I think building a business is an opportunity if one chooses to kind of create almost like a testament to who you can be at your best. We're all flawed people and all of that kind of thing. But, to articulate what your values are as a person and to figure out how you would try to inject that into a company in very tangible ways is a pretty exciting opportunity. So in many ways, I'm it's day one again.
And you're doing your own thing in a funny sort of way, aren't you? Yeah, because I think, thank you for that, because that's not only remarkably honest, but it's also very helpful, because what I think it does is unpack really where we sometimes get to. And I don't think any of us crystal ball at the age of 5, 10, 15, or even 25. I want to be a certain place or a certain position or have a certain amount of money by X time. But then we probably discover that we've got these supplementary entrepreneurial skills, or that people like us, or that we can build something, and you get caught up in that. But the beauty is, as it grows, you start to get trapped into, actually, do you know what is life really about? What did I think I was always going to do or be? And sometimes I'm certain it's not as exciting as it looks from the outside when people see you rushing around like a nutter, really enjoying the spoils, shall we say. but actually it's costing you. You're working whatever it was for you, 12, 14-hour days, burning out at the edges. The kids are kind of saying, where's dad at sports day, or whatever it does. So that was a tremendously honest thing for you to say. Thank you. Because I think, being brave enough to sometimes step back and say, hey, do you know what? This isn't making me happy. I'm not really enjoying this. And I guess that must have all gone through your head at some point.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't feel brave at the time. It felt like self-preservation. But, and I don't want to overstate it. I mean, I think I did a fairly good job of being physically present. I think it was more emotionally present though. So it's like I would shut my laptop off. I usually am the one making dinner for the family and things like that, but I would be elsewhere. I would still be processing the various situations that were going on. And so I'd be sitting at dinner with the family and like often not listening fully the way that I could be.
Yeah.
So I just think there were I think there were probably dozens or hundreds of little minor things that I probably missed as a result of that, just because I wasn't fully present. And so I want to try to be in this season of life. I'm practicing trying to be more fully engaged. So what that means for me is I think I still love work. I still have ambition. I want Madison to grow. And when I am working on Madison, I want to be focused and intense and have keep momentum, focus on efficiency and how effective I am with my time. But then when I shut it down, and
well done.
Have rituals to kind of transition, and then I'm fully present with my wife, fully present with my kids, fully present with whatever it is that I'm doing. So that's part of the goal. And I think you mentioned life, like work kind of fitting in your life, like a framework that was really helpful for me during those 18 months. I got a little disenfranchised with the make a dent in the universe kind of narrative. And that was something that was Kool-Aid that I drank for many, many years. And I think it came maybe from venture land almost, of like 9 out of 10 businesses fail in your portfolio. And so the one that succeeds needs to make a dent in the universe as defined by a very meaningful exit. And so, I think it's a bad narrative for most people, because the number of companies that have $1 billion outcome, let's say, are actually pretty small. And so most entrepreneurs are failures by that definition. Employee number 20 is a failure by that definition because they didn't do it, or you could rationalize like how important was their role. The barista at my coffee shop that gives me joy every day with a smile and a cup of coffee, a legal addictive stimulant, is a failure by that definition. So like I needed something bigger and that was more redeeming. And the framework that I settled on, I called it job, vocation, work, life. And so job is what I do for money. Vocation is what gives me the most joy. So for me, cooking, I've become quite good, but if I ever opened up a restaurant, I think I would ruin it. So that's not my job. My work is, I called it the sum of lasting good I create in the world. And then life is just the person I'm becoming. And so that was super helpful for me, because during that 18 months, when I didn't have a quote unquote job, I still had work to do. And it didn't, and I don't want to trivialize how easy, like this was actually quite difficult to get here. I would sit at dinner parties and people would turn to you and ask you, what do you do? And it used to feel really good to say like, I used to say I'm a partner in a venture fund and I teach at Kellogg. And like, now I was like, well, I drive my kid to camp, like it was just a different, it took me longer than I would have liked to get to this point, but I eventually realized that like, I still have work to do, and I'm not, my value is not exclusively, confined to my job. And so it doesn't mean that I don't think my job,
defined by it, actually.
Which doesn't mean that it doesn't matter. Like I still think it matters, and I still want to do good. I still want to do well. And like I said, I haven't completely murdered my ambition, but I think that it is placed in a more healthy context, in the sense of like, I'm going to retire at some point when I'm in, I don't know when that'll be, 60, 70, whatever it is. I tend to think I'll work for quite a while, but at some point I won't have a quote unquote job again. And that doesn't mean that my life is over. So like, so just trying to capture a more cohesive life narrative, let's say.
Yeah, well done. Well done. And thank you. And thank you so much for sharing that. I think as a psychologist and also spending such a lot of time supporting executives, I would say there are some very specific qualities I notice about them. This is the sort of executive entrepreneurial type group of people. And sometimes I find myself wondering, are we born and bred that way, or do we seem to school ourselves in some of these processes and tools and thoughts? And I think you're absolutely spot on. One of them is, what does success look like? In our head, it's got something to do with a narrative that says we need to make a difference, we need to have a purpose, we need to have set out from dot, with that drive and that focus, almost to the detriment of not necessarily, as you so eloquently put, our family, but potentially, to the detriment of ourselves sometimes. Yeah. We're so busy focusing on the future, we kind of, sometimes forget perhaps the present, or it's always about the next thing. So, of course, you get the classic, climb up Mount Everest thing. They've just achieved the biggest thing known to man and still stand up there and say, right, what's next? Yeah. And so, this is by no means an alien thing to any of us listening. I think we can all relate to the fact that we step on it. But with men in particular, it's very difficult for them because they never seem to be given a grace period of the opportunity to step off it. And I find for women, whether we agree with this or not, this seems to come in the form of maternity leave, for example, because we get an opportunity during that period of time to reflect. Unfortunately for you, you tend to have to shoehorn that in almost by force or by design. So, you took it, well done, and you came out of the other end and you worked out what else you want.
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate. My wife, the timing turned out to be quite good. My wife was an economist for a long time, and was wanting to do something different, and kind of through a series of events, ended up as a chief revenue officer at an investment bank, and then they got bought by private equity, and so she is on the closest thing to a rocket ship for her. In her world that I think one could have. And so the timing was quite good because it was never that we prioritized my career per se, but it was, I was the one doing the home run swing and she was kind of the steady, secure thing. And so we were very fortunate, financially, where I was able to take that time off, but it also was an opportunity for us to kind of recalibrate and say, all right, now it's time to kind of fully kind of lean into her career. And so we made it very conscious of and again, the ambitious part of me is not gone at all. And I believe I can actually build quite a successful company, but with some constraints. And one of those constraints is that my role in our family in this next season is to kind of be super dad a little bit. And so driving to camps, making dinner, doing a lot of the house administrative maintenance stuff so that she can kind of lean fully into and doesn't have to worry and doesn't have to feel bad about juggling and jumping back and forth, because we've made a conscious decision to do that. And so that means certain things about the business. Like that was actually a really interesting exercise too. I think if I would have done things over the first time, I think one of the things I would have done was be clearer on what I want my life to look like. And it's actually it's interesting. One of the things I do now, ostensibly the purpose of Madison is to help market and grow professional services firms. But where we often start is kind of like, what kind of a life are you wanting to have?
Yeah. What do you want? Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was interesting because when we wrote down kind of what those guardrails were and what I needed to be available to do and what how much effort I was willing to kind of put into the company purely from like a time perspective, it meant certain things. Like I can't go get investors. Because in good conscience, as soon as you raise money from outside capital, it's no longer, in a certain sense, it's no longer your company, but you have a fiduciary responsibility to them. And so that means certain things and they have certain expectations, and that's not necessarily wrong. I mean, I think one, and you can go down rabbit trails around like the the moral considerations of the premise that a business exists to kind of maximize shareholder value. But if you assume that that is what your investors at least are buying into, then you have an obligation to them. And so if I want to be able to say that when push comes to shove, if I have to make a decision between supporting my wife and her ambitions or supporting the business, I need to be able to choose my wife. It's much easier, and I don't have to have an argument with anybody. And so, like, if I know that that's true,
good point. Yeah,
it's probably.
I think you work that one out, don't you? Yeah. It's interesting because you're alerting me to a couple of thoughts. They probably seem slightly off-piste or unrelated, but they're not, because I can remember when I first got married, the priest kind of approached us and say, "Would you like to come on a course about talking about what it means to be married?" And we kind of looked blankly at him as if to say, "No, why would we want that? Because we know what it means to get married. We're not planning on getting a divorce. So why would we need a course in how to sort of keep and stay married?"
Yeah.
9 years later, we actually divorced, which I'm never proud of, and I'm sometimes quite sad about. But I think if we'd gone on that flipping course, it probably would have helped us, because what it would have made us reflect on is, who are we? What do we want? And how do we align that so that we can still meet that? As opposed to what happened instead, which is that I was a professional woman with a successful and entrepreneurial side to my nature. So was he. And that clash actually ended up becoming a problem for us. Now, the other point of that, though, is that our children, thankfully, at 24 and 26 now, are very rounded, because whilst I would never have put them through that if I could have avoided it, we actually handled it well. And I think trying in some ways to build something to allow for what you want out of life and to have children and to keep a relationship is actually quite elastic. It's asking a lot of anybody, Sean, it really is. So the very fact that it's amongst the values that you've got, but also the priorities that you've got, says a lot.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's part of the reason why I became sort of a productivity nerd and a time management nerd and all that kind of stuff. But part of it was, in order for me to do all of those other things well, I need to be pretty rigorous and pretty disciplined about how I spend my time when I am at work. And so, like, if I'm not willing to do the 50-hour, 60-hour a week thing on a regular basis, I better become quite good at utilizing my time when I am at work. And so it's a mechanism to kind of do that. So, I mean, I think it's a bunch of things. I think it's having a vision that's ideally a shared vision of like where you're going as a couple or as a family unit or whatever it is, and how do each of your respective careers kind of fit into that. And again, there can be seasons. Like, it's okay. Like I think maybe we maybe prioritized my side of things a little bit more, and now we flipped, and that's okay. But getting really clear on that, and then being really good about systems and processes to, one, at an individual on the business side, like when I'm working, to make sure that work doesn't bleed into those other areas. Because unlike my kids aren't going to yell if to your point, if I don't show up at the soccer game, the client will. And so, like, I need to have thought through how I'm going to handle those situations in advance. I need to have systems in place so that those situations ideally don't happen in the first place. And then I think similarly, like, having systems and processes at a family level has been hugely helpful too, because that allows us to recalibrate and remind ourselves of the shared journey that we're going on. And so, like, for us, that looks like we have a weekly meeting right now it's on Saturdays. It's been different throughout the years, but we look at the calendar coming up. We look at like the things that we have going on, but then we periodically are also touching base on like, how is this going? And
good for you.
Is this okay, this current setup? And is there anything that needs to be changed? Is there anything else you're needing from me? Blah, blah, blah. Not every week, but like every quarter, let's say. And then we'll do some course correction. But yeah, I think all of those things, I think are necessary because otherwise I don't, to your point, like it's really hard to just kind of have two different people with two different sets of ambitions, two different sets of things. And there's a lot of communication, I think, that has to happen to make sure that.
Yeah. Both internally within the business and within your own life. And this is very much what we're endorsing. One of the things that I'm interested in then really is because your personal journey and your professional journey has taught you such a lot about what success really is. And I'm sure that has morphed and changed as you've gone on your journey.
Yeah.
What would you define it as being now, do you think? What do you feel it is?
Well, for me right now, I touched on it a little bit. For me right now, building a business that is congruent with my values as much as possible. And so, and I wrote down what some of those things were. And so, craft became important to me. And I think a lot of this is like naming things that that were latent. But craft for me meant, I think there is an art to work, and it is not just for a painter. I think you can be an artist as an accountant. I think you can be an artist as an HR person. I think that and what craft means to me there is being committed to learning how to do it as well as I possibly can, and then submitting myself to a process of practice and discipline to get progressively better at it and to execute it the same way every single time. So it's similar to like working on motorcycles, or it's similar to, like I just think that there is dignity in that. And so that's super important to me. I realized service is kind of important to me. I get gratification out of helping other people. And so when I was reflecting on previous life, I realized that even though it wasn't as sexy, let's say, as the venture fund, I actually really enjoyed the advisory business. I really liked working with clients and trying to help them solve their problems. And so with this, with what I was going to do next, I kind of realized, like, I think I want to start another professional services firm. And so that was helpful. And so that's an opportunity of like, how do I show up each day and try to serve my clients? How do I look for ways to go above and beyond the scope in ways that will surprise and delight them? And how can I do that in a systematic way every single time again, so that they're like, I can't believe how lucky I am to have found this firm. That's the goal. And so,
right.
So for me, I feel like, and yes, there are revenue targets and there are profitability targets and things like that, but I don't think of those as the goal anymore, which in a way, I've never been monetarily driven, really. I was monetarily driven, though, as a signal that I had, quote unquote, made it. Like, I think I had revenue targets before that signaled that I was good at this, so to speak. And so that hasn't totally gone away, but it is a little bit different. I mean, I trying to create a business that is easy to buy, that generates value relative to how much it costs, that is 10 times what they're paying. And how can I do that through good systems and good processes so that their business is growing and they feel like this is a bargain? Like that's what I'm trying to do this time around. So it's not I do have revenue targets, I do have profitability targets, but it is not a profit or a revenue maximization exercise, let's say. So I don't know. But that's very idiosyncratic to me. I mean, I don't think that's prescriptive for everybody. That's just how but it's interesting. So like I read, there is old literature around like what the purpose is of a business. And we sort of take it as a given that the purpose of a business is to, again, maximize shareholder value or to enrich financially the life of the person creating the business. And it wasn't always that way. And it wasn't that the purpose wasn't that the business didn't make money. It just wasn't the purpose of it. And so there's a guy, John Ruskin, who was a philosopher in the 1800s, and he wrote about the quote professions. And he talked about like the doctor's profession is to heal, the teachers to teach, the military to protect, and the merchant, your job is to provide for your community. And that there is nobility in that the same way that there is as a physician. And so I think to the degree that I can act in alignment with that, and he was like, it's getting profit from the business is the same as getting like your stipend as a teacher. It's a necessary outcome, or it follows from doing your job well. But the aim of the teacher isn't to generate a stipend. If you ask the teacher,
to make a difference. Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I'm trying to recapture that and be less. The purpose of the business is not primarily to enrich myself. I trust that if I do the right things and I show up consistently, I will be just fine and I will make plenty of money. But it is to kind of point to something, and it's to point to the values that I.
Yeah. The value proposition is undoubtedly in the delivery of the service and the quality of that service. And I think when we get that right, the money tends to take care of itself. It's not the primary driver for those of us who didn't wake up when we were dot and decide, okay, I want to make a load of money. Or if we did, we then usually found actually that comes at the detriment or loss of the happiness that we tend to get from it. So I think that's all part of the learning as well, which is brilliant. Thank you. On listening to you in other podcast interviews, I've been interested to find there's a couple of things that came up which have a great description I'd like to share with you. One of them is I love the idea of building funeral-worthy relationships. What's that about? That's a great expression. What does that mean?
You did your research. So I kind of consistent with that whole job, vocation, work, life thing. Life is the person I'm becoming. And that's the ultimate goal of all of this. And so my job is an opportunity to kind of practice building the kind of person I want to be. So the kind of character I want to have. And it's actually a great opportunity because, you're working on real projects with real constraints with people that you may or may not like always. And so it's an opportunity to learn how to be patient and learn how to be kind and learn how to avoid being angry and learn how to be productive and learn how to avoid being jealous and all of these kinds of things. The idea behind funeral-worthy relationships was, all right, if make a dent in the universe as defined by some big financial outcome is no longer my goal, what could I create a tangible KPI, let's say, for my life? And the one that I settled on was funeral-worthy relationships. And the idea was what kind of an impact would you have to make on someone's life for them to drop what they're doing and fly across the country to be at your funeral? And it's kind of silly because I won't know if I was effective at it. And it is a bit morbid, but I don't know. I just think that's a good orientation. And it's sort of how do I show up for my clients? That's a good one. Of client, because I think we often think of client relationships as being relatively transactional, and there's dangers in trying to be too friendly or things like that. But what kind of an impact would I have to make in my client's life for them to do that? And so that I just think is, and you think about famous sort of celebrity funerals and things like that. And sometimes you get the impression that people show up to be seen or whatever, but there are certain types of people where it just seems like people show up because again, that person made a huge impact. And it came from a story I read in a book years ago about a teacher at a high school in West Texas, middle of nowhere in Texas. And he died. And the author was asked to come to the funeral and give the eulogy, and he said sure. And he kept getting phone calls as it was getting closer to him where they had to move the venue to a bigger place because there were more people that wanted to come. And it ended up happening. They had to have the funeral in a baseball stadium because 3,000 people wanted to be at the funeral for this guy. And he's just a random guy he wasn't famous, he wasn't an influencer, he wasn't any of those kinds of things, but he must have done something meaningful for each one of these people. And so that just was a really neat way of kind
It
of
is, isn't it? Yeah, it's a great testimony. And it's funny, really, because when you and I do business, we always value a testimonial that comes after we've done business. But I think in some ways it's a bigger tribute to us if we actually found somebody was willing to rock up in order to celebrate our life in some way because we've made a difference. Yeah. And I understand now. Thank you for sharing that. And I think the other one was something I found quite interesting, because you have also a personal site, which is a rather nice one, actually, which is in your own name. Just to make sure people know that, it's www.sean-johnson.com. And I liked it, but there's a particular reference again within your pod, or one of the podcast interviews, which talks about something you call the personal operating system. Can you also explain that one a bit?
Sure. Yeah. So, and you could potentially say I'm mildly to moderately OCD. So I caveat this with that. But so I wrote down a 10-year vision for my life during this kind of period where I had off, and what I want my life to look like in very tangible ways. I translated that into kind of 1 to 3 year vision plans for each of the kind of the visions that I was trying to create. And then kind of realized, like, you don't move forward on things unless you have good systems in place. And so I thought about, like, well, what are the systems that I need to have in order to do this well? And I came up with 4. And part of this was like, in order to accomplish a vision, I think you need to know certain things. I think you need to do certain things. And I think you need to know certain people. And so one system is task management. So how do I get very disciplined about having a comprehensive view of all of the projects and all of the next steps for all of those projects so that I'm productively moving forward on my vision? And a lot of that is basically like getting things done, the David Allen, that kind of productivity stuff. Relationship management is the second one. So who are the people in my life that I want to build relationships with, nurture relationships with, and how do I do that in a systematic way? And that has, that helps me accomplish the vision, but it also directly ties into kind of the whole funeral relationship thing. I would love it if I were the kind of person that could keep all that stuff in my head, but I'm not. And so I lean on tools to help. So I have just like a business person has a CRM, I have a personal CRM, and it has a cadence for when I should remember to follow up with people. And I keep track of things like their birthdays, their spouse's birthdays, their anniversaries, their kids' birthdays, how old their kids are, where they went to college, projects that they're working on, things they need help with, et cetera, et cetera. And so, that is a mechanism for me to try to build into people in a scalable way. And then the third one's knowledge management. And so that is, again, if I want to progressively get better at my craft, to the degree that executing on these vision plans is at least a function of like what I know, how do I have a system for learning and for retaining what I am trying to learn? And so,
good point.
And so that is, and there's a cadence for review based on that. So it's basically like, how do I take notes on what I read? And then at what cadence do I review that stuff? So that's to kind of cement knowledge. And that has been really helpful for me in the context of Madison, especially because, and I didn't fully realize it at the time, but the most effective way to market a professional services firm is through thought leadership. You basically are selling your brain, you're selling what you know. And so for me, my knowledge management system or my note-taking system, you get to a point eventually where you are never struggling for what to write about, because you've done the work already of capturing knowledge, synthesizing that knowledge, and referring back to that knowledge, so that you've got just a library of stuff that you can kind of refer to at any given time. And so part of that is what I call unified theory documents. So when I decide I want to learn about a topic, I obviously take notes on all the books that I'm reading or all the articles I'm reading about that topic, but then I organize it into, I do kind of the next step of like, all right, what parts of this do I agree with? What parts do I disagree with? How does this fit into the other kind of mental models that I have? And how do I create sort of a kind of comprehensive overview of what I believe to be true about that particular topic? And that's a living document. It evolves over time. But that's been really, really helpful for me, especially as I've been building Madison, because I started with, well, what do I believe to be true about marketing professional service firms at a high level? And then underneath that, what do I believe to be true about kind of each of the different pieces of that? So what do I believe to be true about how you position a firm, for example? And so that is a document that, or set of documents rather, that have made it much more helpful for me to codify what I believe to be true. And then as I'm thinking ahead, because the goal of Madison is not to be, I don't want to be a solopreneur with, bots running around doing stuff. Like I want to build a team again. I very much enjoyed that part of Manifold. That knowledge management is a way for me to replicate myself and to replicate my learning at scale. Like if I were to try to force somebody to read all the things that I have read, for example, to really internalize that would be years and years of work on their part. And so having these unified theory documents, and then, it still takes them time, between when you read something and when it's kind of in your bones. But I do feel like I can potentially short circuit that or shortcut that learning curve by having those documents. And so they have the ability, it's almost like a curriculum that they can that I can give them.
Well done.
Yeah, this is how Madison thinks about this particular topic, kind of thing. So
completely. But, thank you for sharing that too, because what I think I'm picking up, which is definitely what you're expressing today, both directly and indirectly, is that systems and processes are the way to be able to make something work. Sometimes we have to hinge our own life on a system or a process because it enables us to remember something of significance about a person. And then by default, we hope that they will remember us particularly well. That's what you've articulated today. But also that's how we're going to become memorable to our clients, because we're going to treat them as if they are important enough that they come at the top of that list of our personal documents and our systems and processes.
Yeah.
So Sean,
those things are really helpful too. Like one of the things I've learned is that there's an interplay between them. So, with when I'm working on a project, for example, if I complete the project, previous me would have just archived that project, and the project is no longer useful to me. What I've realized though is that both my project management stuff and my knowledge management stuff improve my relationship management in the sense of, so you think about like a lot of. Thankfully, the way I've set up Madison, my sales cycle is actually pretty brief. But my previous innovation consulting work, those were 7-figure, 8-figure deals that would take 2 years or so to close. And it was a committee sale. There'd be 12 people involved, blah, blah, blah. And one of the things that people talk about a lot of times in long-term sales cycles, especially, is like, what in the world do I say with touch point 20, other than like, hey, are you ready to buy yet? And what I have found is that, they might mention that they're going to Paris, and I went to Paris. I took my kids to Paris. And so that's a project that I have my itinerary, and I have all the things that we did and what we liked and what we didn't like. And so that's now an artifact that I can get off that phone call and
share.
Just be like, hey, for whatever it's worth, here's the itinerary that we took to Paris. Hope that's helpful for you. Or, if there's a book that I read that I think would speak to one of the areas that somebody is struggling with, I can either, sometimes what I'll do is I'll immediately get off that call and buy the book and then send it to them, which is kind of a nice gift. People don't throw away books. So, one of the things that Madison does is we don't send swag because they want to rep their company. They don't want to rep my company. So I send them books with a little note on the inside of the flap. And it's always a fiction book that they can read or whatever, but it's just like great literature, that kind of thing. But if I don't send them the book, what I can do is I can send them my notes on the book. And so I can save them the time of having to take 5 hours to read the book. And because I'm pretty disciplined about how I structure my notes, they can basically get it's basically like the executive summary thing, but it's my version of it. And so that is kind of a nice way to help people. And so that gives me tons and tons and tons of additional ways to build and nurture relationships.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah. And I think that brings us to really the point, and that's just superb, is the fact that creating value is about being ourselves. I think although we use sometimes slightly trite expressions like let's be authentic, we have to actually understand what being authentic looks like and is real and is when we execute that. And I think that helps us work out what success means, and the fact that it's okay for it to be something we have personally worked out constitutes success for us in our lives. Sean, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. I could easily have done double that and talked forever.
Well, if you ever want to do round 2, let me know. I'm around. So.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. Do promise to come back on the show, because we've definitely got lots of value from you today. So thank you so much. And I will absolutely make sure everybody can find Madison, because I think the beauty is, most genuinely, what they're going to get is a real person who wants to make a real difference. So it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you. That was Sean Johnson there, CEO of Madison, the marketing company for professional services. And I think he did such a lovely job. We will make sure that the website address is in the podcast notes. But also he has a personal site that you will have heard me mention there, www.sean-johnson.com. And, you know, his background and everything that he's personally learnt, but also professionally, just is so... shines out of him, really, doesn't it? And it was so easy to be able to comprehend some of the life lessons that he'd also learned. And I think what that does is round you out as a person, make you feel very energized, very positive, but also help drive your values, what it is that you offer. And if you can get in alignment with that, that's just fantastic, because the next thing that you take on, no matter what it is, you know, you're really going to do well at. And I think that's what you could see, or at least it was what I felt I could see in Sean. So that was absolutely great conversation. And thank you so much for your time there. We just have some great guests on this show, don't we? So please do take a listen to all the other episodes. We're on all of the major platforms, and it's been an absolute pleasure. Take care of yourself, everyone. Bye for now.